Folks are very, very kind. Thank you very much for having me here. So as indicated, Jim Rubens, and I'd be tremendously honored to be your U.S. Senator. And a little bit of background. I grew up in Connecticut, came up here to go to college at Dartmouth, and my parents wound up getting divorced. I pretty much finished my chemistry major, and the money ran out, and so I left college and went out into the world to get a job. And it was during one of those recessions, and I couldn't get a job, and so I wound up becoming a dump picker. Back when dumps were dumps, people would back a pickup truck to the edge of a bank where there was the town dump, and the road agent would come once a week and torch it off, and it'd be this black mess, and I'd crawl over this black mess during the weekday after the burn as quickly as possible afterward and collect the copper and brass from refrigerators and air conditioners and busted sinks. And I had a bicycle. I couldn't afford a car, so I'd put the copper and brass in my bicycle rack in the front of the bike, and I'd take it down to the junk dealer, and I was able to earn a really pretty good living. I was able to earn about $40 an hour at the time, which was a lot of money, and I was able to buy my first apartment building on the wrong side of the tracks. It was in a bad neighborhood in the Upper Valley, which is up near Hanover, Lebanon. Then I added a unit and fixed it up.
I think they call it Dartmouth.
Well, that's just outside of Dartmouth. There are two towns outside of it. There is the wrong side of the tracks. And I fixed it up and invested and kept investing. And I started a business, my first business, which was successful, and I sold about a year and a half after I started it. And I really enjoyed that. And I started about 10 more businesses. And what I love doing is solving problems. That's really what I most enjoy doing, and I'd like to bring that to the United States Senate. Now, I did this in the state Senate, as Mike mentioned. I got down there to Concord, and I wound up in the Senate President's office because I had run against a Senate President who was what you would call a rhino. And I defeated him in the primary, and I went through a bruising primary to defeat him, and I won a general election in a Democratic leading district. That was a tough election. And I campaigned on these big ideas, which is now called Senate Bill 2, voting in charter schools, and people liked it. They hadn't heard of this stuff before, but I actually persuaded people of the other persuasion that this made a lot of sense to try some really new, exciting stuff. Got elected, got down there, and the Senate President, the new one, who was very grateful for me for having gotten rid of the old one, because it allowed him to ascend to that Senate presidency. And he said, Jim, you've got to slow down a little bit. This is great ideas, but it's not the way we work down here. And I said, my term of office is 2 years. I made some big promises to folks. I intend to keep them, and could you help me out? And he says, well, all right. I said, what would you like? I'd like a committee chairmanship, I said. And I had never held office before, and he gave me a committee chairmanship. Fortunately, the one required to navigate Senate Bill 2 promptly through the legislature, and I get that passed in my first year in office, and 5 times the number of people are now voting in local elections because of that Senate Bill 2. This is a big difference. And my second year in office, I wrote the charter school law. There are 20 some odd of them now in the state, and what's wonderful is the top testing school in our state is a high school, the Nashua Academy of Science and Design, top testing in the state, pretty near here.
Where is it?
It's
in Amherst Street,
Oh, of course, that's where
the charter school.
my friend's granddaughter goes there.
Right.
And it's nearly all Indian
It's
children.
number 15 in the nation.
Number 50.
Number 50 in the nation. That's
Yeah.
school.
Of high schools?
Yeah,
Yeah.
charter school.
Everyone goes there.
Academy of
And it-
Right.
yeah.
She's in that school.
You're in that school?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Mackenzie.
From 6th grade to 12th grade.
Yeah, they've expanded great.
Wonderful
Also,
school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you do.
And the great thing about it is it runs at about 1/3 the cost per student
Yes.
of the average
Right.
high school. So
Right.
this is what Republicans ought to be proud of. Not that we're retrograde, but that we can use our core values of limited government, more freedom, more diversity, local control, parental control, and we can make lives better. So it's not just theoretical. We can solve problems. And this is what's really exciting about the fact, Democrats' approach is to have government do something for you, and we can use our model, which is more freedom and less government and more diversity, and solve problems even better. So I'd like to take that approach to the United States Senate, because we've got some very, very serious problems down there. Matter of fact, our problems put us in the United States in a very, very perilous circumstance right now, more so than my lifetime. The American public is demoralized, angry, frustrated with government, and things have got to change. Things have got to change very significantly. So I will talk about 3 issues really quickly, very quickly. If you guys have questions, that'd be great. The first one is the economy, and we're fighting socialism. The Democrats' approach is to fix the economy because people are under pressure. Wages have gone down, cost of living has gone up, and this has been going on for 15 years now. This is the first time this has happened since World War II that we've had this kind of change in our economy. It's a negative economy. Families are under serious pressure. So I differ very, very fundamentally with my opponent on her immigration and trade policies. This is new to Republicans to take the side of regular Americans on this issue. The trade policies and immigration policies that these folks like Elliott have adopted in Washington are driving down American wages and shoving jobs offshore. So this has got to stop, and our party, the Republican Party, has got to take the side of trade that doesn't lead to the problem we have right now, which is a hemorrhaging of $500 billion a year. You can't hemorrhage money like this. We've been doing it for years now and expect anything other than what's happening, which is jobs are leaving, wealth is leaving, investment is leaving, and it's just, we're now at $1.2 trillion in debt to China. So this has got to change. We need to change the tax and regulatory system. And Republicans have been talking about this for as long as I've gone to Republican events. Republicans talk about how wonderful it would be to have a simpler tax code with lower rates and fewer loopholes and a simpler regulatory structure than what we have right now. And you notice it never gets done. And the reason that it doesn't get done is because the people who buy politicians in Washington, we've got a bought and paid for Congress down there, Republicans and Democrats know this now, is because the people who buy politicians want the tax code really complicated on behalf of their clients. It preserves and protects oligopoly. So, for example, we have in many parts of our state of New Hampshire cell phone service worse than Africa. That's amazing. The reason for that is because these oligopolies like the regulatory complexity, the crony capitalism, and we need to change this. Republicans have got to belly up to the bar, bite the hand that's been feeding us, which are these lobbyists, handing out millions of bucks to get people reelected forever, and tame them down so they don't do anything about it. So we've got to take the side of making our economy grow again. And it will grow better if we can have lower rates in the tax code, lower corporate tax rates, simpler tax structure, and fewer regulations. And so one of the things I'm proposing is that all existing regulation have to be approved by Congress. This is not the case now. We have this massive Leviathan regulatory state now that needs to be tamed. We have 15 times the number of laws that we did compared to right after World War II. And with that has grown this Leviathan regulatory state. It's got to be tamed so that all new regulations must be approved by Congress. It's not the case now. All existing regulations come back on a rotating basis. I say 15 years, choose another number, to be revisited by Congress, and Congress votes up or down. So what will happen is regulations that are overlapping, duplicatory, excessively complex, that stifle small business where the jobs are, would become repealed or simplified. So the regulatory structure is so blasted complicated because the oligopolies that buy politicians want it that way. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley has 50,000 people on staff doing regulatory compliance. And what's happened, this is an example, Dodd-Frank, of this kind of regulation. It's tens of thousands of pages of regulations, and if you're very big, you can handle it. And what's happened is the too big to fail banks, as a result of this law and the regulation that flowed from it, the too big to fail banks are bigger, and the community banks, such as the ones we have here in New Hampshire, are smaller, they've lost market share, there's less lending to small business, and it's hurting economic growth. So these are issue number one. Issue number two is the debt. And Republicans, again, as long as I've been to Republican events, we talk about how we're fiscally responsible. Right? My opponent gets down to Washington, and she votes for Cromnibus and Omnibus, which are the last two budgets. And those two budgets added $1.5 trillion to the U.S. national debt. And those votes took place just over the last 20 months now. $1.5 trillion added as a result of a Republican voting for Obama's and the Democrats' budgets. It's really weird. So I fundamentally differ with that kind of fiscal irresponsibility. And the effect of that kind of irresponsibility is to starve capital investment, starve research and development, burden us with debt service. And according to Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's our single greatest threat to U.S. national security is the debt. Because economies that come weakened with debt become burdened with debt service, become weaker economically, become weaker militarily. The single greatest threat to U.S. national security are those votes, including by Republicans, to make this happen. So we need to take a different approach. We need to use the power of the purse, those of us in Congress, unlike the incumbent, and force the president, force big spending Republicans, force Democrats to the bargaining table, as Newt Gingrich did in the 1990s. And as they did down there, they forced them to the bargaining table. They got 4 years of balanced budgets and surpluses. The economy grew. Regulations were reduced. It was a good time. So Republicans can do this again if we have backbone. And that's a missing element here. And issue number 3 is national security. And once again, I differ with the incumbent. The incumbent has been cheerleading for Hillary Clinton's endless string of whack-a-mole nation-building wars that have failed to contain terror. ISIS has now spread. They've spread terrorism, and Americans are less safe. It has not worked. Okay? So we need a different approach to U.S. national security, and it begins with something very basic. It begins with border security, because over that open border, and my opponent promised to vote for border security, promised to vote against amnesty, gets down there with the other folks down there and drank the Kool-Aid and voted for the Gang of Eight open borders amnesty bill. And the borders are open, and drug mules and bad guys are coming across that border, and they are killing us in New Hampshire right now. The fentanyl is coming across that border, most of it. It's killing people in New Hampshire now, that open border. So number 1, national security, you need a border. Number 2, we need to tell Saudi Arabia, who we now know because of the unredacted 28 pages, we need to tell Saudi Arabia, the Gulf state monarchies, Pakistan, and Turkey to stop funding terror. These are our so-called allies. We know that Saudi Arabia is the world's leading funder of these madrasas. That word formerly meant centers of learning. They now are places, and there are 20 to 30,000 of them around the world, that foster this cancerous variant of Islam that preaches hatred and death. So we need to tell Saudi Arabia and Turkey, etc., to stop funding terror. And so the approach I take on terrorism is what I call quarantine and strangulation. You strangle them by cutting off the money. You've got to start by cutting off the money. Our government has left the money flowing to them, and you've got to quarantine them with a border. You don't let them come into your country. Another thing that we need to do is, and this is where the Constitution comes in, we need to, if war is necessary, if and when it's necessary, we need to require that Congress, consistent with the Constitution, respecting our veterans and soldiers, bring up a debate over the nature and structure of the war with a plan to win and exit, with a constitutional declaration of war. That will keep more people honest. Right now, there is no strategy to win. So these are some of the things. I have much more detailed plan on how to keep America safe. There are many points at jimrubens.com. You can go there and look at the drop-down menu under Keep America Safe. So these are all differences between myself and the incumbent. The yellow sheet has many more areas where I differ with her. And this is a little bit of tactical stuff on this election. I'm obviously the underdog. I'm running against a very, very entrenched incumbent with lots and lots of money, millions of dollars of lobbyist money. The establishment does not want this primary. But here's the structure of this problem that she has. The conservatives have bailed out on Senator Ayotte because of what you see on the yellow sheet there. And we see that from the 603 Alliance having rejected her and given me a thumbs up. 603 Alliance is the major coalition of conservative organizations, grassroots conservative organizations in the state. You can't win a general election in a purple state like this without conservative votes. We went through that with Brown last time, so she's gone. The establishment has got to wrap their arms around the fact that she has divorced conservatives. Liberty Republicans don't like her because of her incredible, awful voting pattern. She has an F rating from Conservative Union. She has a 27 rating from Heritage Action. She's voting remarkably like your Democratic Congresswoman here in CD2. Her voting pattern is very, very similar to Annie Custer. That's how bad it is. So conservatives have bailed. You can't win in this purple state.
And
in
Annie
general election.
Custer's a better human being.
I don't know about that, but they vote
Yeah.
remarkably about
yeah.
the same. So you can't win without conservatives because we're a purple state. And so what I'm doing is two things. I'm advocating that Republicans adopt policies that reflect our core values, that are built on them, and will solve problems using those core values. And secondly, the nature of funding for elections have changed greatly since Citizens United. There are tens of millions of dollars already in the bank and booked for the general election to defeat Maggie Hassan, because the money is not yacht money now. It's Save the Senate money. This is what's really different. A lot of the presidential money has shifted to protecting the House and Senate. So there's all this money is there, and that money will flow to whichever the two of us wins the primary. Because the objective is not to elect either one of us, it's to retain Republican control of the U.S. Senate. And I will be perfectly, I've been to Washington, talked with the folks, I'd be perfectly satisfactory, they've chosen the other candidate, perfectly satisfactory because they want Republican control. So the money is there in abundance to defeat Maggie Hassan. The advantage I have in the general is I can attract conservatives, I can attract Liberty Republicans, I can attract Trump voters, and make our party bigger, like what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. He made the party bigger by attracting new people. Ayotte is taking the approach of making the party smaller. It's a strategy of loss. So the responsibility, the opportunity is there for grassroots Republicans in this state of New Hampshire to select a candidate who not only can win the general and advocate policies built on our core values, but who can win and protect this Republican seat for us in the U.S. Senate. So there's a tactical reason to vote for me, to defend the seat for Republicans, and there's an ideological, principled reason to vote for me, to have a Republican who actually will vote like a Republican in the U.S. Senate. It's all upside. So I'd love to have your support. Happy to answer any questions. JimRubens.com.
Crop TV.